Hello Art 1 students. So the purpose of this video is going to be to show you all how to draw this example of the lips, which is the one that is due at the end of the day. So I'm going to just kind of go through some of the steps, some of the tips and techniques, and based on what I've been seeing in class, just remind you of some of the things that you need to be really careful of, such as making sure that you have value transitions, not just lines indicating where things are. So the first thing I'm going to do is, just as we've done in the past, I'm going to start here and then move through every step of the process. And one thing to pay attention to with this particular set of lips is that it is not a front view. So you want to make sure that you are doing what you see here, not just a front view of the lips like this one. Now, if you feel like you need to practice these ones first, that is absolutely fine, and you can work your way up to these, because you will be required to do one of these, and you'll be required to do one of the open mouths by the end of this entire unit. But the one I'm going to show you is the one that is due first. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw that line. This sort of goes where the center of the lip is, and I'm going to make sure I curve it a bit. And I'm going to make sure the top part is further to the right than the bottom part. Then I'm just going to draw that line that goes sort of where the corner of the mouth is. It's going to curve up ever so slightly and go across, and then curve down just a teeny bit on the other end. So I'll zoom in a bit so you can see better here. And now I'm going to draw sort of the bow of the lip. And because it's foreshortened on this side, this angle is going to be longer and more gradual than this angle. And then I'm going to skip down for the bottom of the lip, and it's about twice as far down as the top of the lip is. And I'm just going to draw something kind of like this there. So that would be sort of the first steps of the lip. Once again, draw everything very, very lightly, because you will be doing a lot of erasing and a lot of shading. So now I'm going to move into the second step. The first thing I'm going to do is just indicate this line here. So for me, I like to start in the middle with the changes that I'm making here. And then kind of work my way up and then back down. That's just what works best for me. Each person is a little bit different. So as usual, it is absolutely okay if you find that you are working in a slightly different pattern or way than I am. Absolutely fine. So that might be the second step. And then that third step is where we start to get a little bit of the shading. And there is a pretty significant jump there. So the main thing you want to do is just look for where you have those darker values. And again, you're not going to start out super dark yet. Everything's going to be relatively light still towards the beginning. And I'm going to hold my pencil pretty far back. And I'm just going to start laying in a kind of light gray color wherever it looks like I will eventually have shadows. This is kind of an example of underpainting, or laying down sort of a base coat or an undershadow. So it's like a precursor to shading, kind of. So you see here on the lower lip, we're already leaving a spot for some reflected light here. Because people's lips do tend to be a bit glossier than other parts of the face, so there will be probably a bit more of a reflected light and more of like a shine spot almost on those lips. So once again, everything is still very, very light, just little bits of shading at a time. Because one of the most important things to remember, once again, with drawing any facial feature or anything really, is to build up that value in layers. You are not just going to all of a sudden jump in with a dark value. There's a couple of reasons for that, but the biggest reason is because it is easier to correct things when you are still in the early stages if you start out nice and light. The darker you get with your shading, the harder it is to correct things, and the more likely you'll just have to start over. So now I'm just going back in and darkening some of those shadow areas a little bit. Still just on that third step. There's just a lot on that third step. Still not getting super dark yet, because I want to make sure that I get some accuracy in there, and then my lines and shadows and everything are in the correct spots before I get too dark with any of my shading. So just adding nice smooth value transitions here, so that every single time I add a layer of shading, I'm doing it in value transitions from dark to light, not just a solid line or a solid value. Everything's going to transition into the next value. Even if it's a very subtle transition, it's still a transition. Now I'm going to put some of that darker shadow that goes under the lips here. I'm not going to get it super dark yet, but you will see that it is more of a shape than a value scale. It still is a value scale. It still is darkest directly under the lip, and then it does get lighter as it moves down, but you'll see that there's a definite end to where it is because it's a shadow that's being cast on the chin by the lip. So it might not fade quite as much at the bottom as most of our shadows do. So that might be sort of the third step on the lips there. And then when I look at that fourth step, I see that I've got some of the shading above the lip. I'm going to use that initial line that I had to help me get sort of that divot that's there in between the lips. And I'm going to fade it out so that it gets back to the paper color here. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. But this is going to continue a little darker first, and then it's going to fade. That should be pointed a little bit more the other direction So I'm just going to erase that and then put in the value scale kind of going towards that point up here a little bit more. Again, still just keeping it super light. And notice that we are using a reflected light sort of on the top of the lips here to indicate sort of that separation of skin and lip. But you'll also notice that on this part of our lip, towards the corner, it's darker and there's not a reflected light. So I'm going to darken that a little bit. And I'm not going to have a reflected light there, but there is still a value separation. So now one thing when you are drawing lips, it's very helpful to shade sort of in the direction of the lip. So I'm going to curve these lines up a little bit as I work on increasing these shadows, because what that's going to do is help create the roundness of that lip there, because we are shading in the direction that the lip actually goes. Kind of like when we talked about the sphere, directional line will help indicate the actual angle and shape of the lip there. So now we're starting to get that pretty decent shadow in here. Which continues into sort of the corner of the lip over here. And then I'm going to move into this side and darken it as well, because there's a pretty dark spot here in this corner of the lip also. And remember, this is still just my HB pencil. No Tortillon yet. The only time I have used my kneaded eraser so far has just been to correct a mistake. Because the lips are pretty textured. You do not want to use the Tortillon as much on the lips as you might on any other facial feature, because you want the pencil lines to help create the texture of the lip there. So again, I'm just using very soft pencil marks here, letting everything gradually get back into that whiter page color. Now I'm going to go into my lower lip. And work a little bit on that shading. So one thing that you'll find that is interesting about the lips is that the spot here, unless it's angled like this, the spot sort of to the side of the lower lips usually just kind of fades directly into the skin. You're not going to necessarily have like a line that goes all the way across. That is one thing that is very tempting, is to put that line there, but your shadow under the lip indicates that line, and then you'll see that the skin and the lip on that specific spot just kind of fade into each other. So now I'm darkening my shadow that goes under the lip a little bit here. I'm going to go into this lip with some of the texture shading. Basically still using that value transition, but now I'm actually going sort of up and down across that lip to start to get some of that texture definition in there too. So in the next video, I'm going to continue working on the lip. I'm going to make some of those shadow areas darker, and I'm going to continue to add a little bit of texture, and I'll probably use the kneaded eraser a little bit more to bring up some of those highlights towards the end as I get into that darkest value.